What's up, everybody? Here we are. It feels good to be podventuring again. I don't even know. We've recorded one or two here and there, and some of the chaos that's ensued in the world, so I don't even know when exactly this one's going to pop out. So if I already said, hey, it's crazy to be back, I apologize for being redundant. But it is, and it's good to be back. We're actually outside right now, and the reason for being outside is because you can't beat this weather we're having and this beautiful view in the background of this range set up at Isaiah Curtis's place. And he is the guest with us here, tailgating with us right now. And what we want to talk with him about, first off, is allowing him to introduce himself, because this is his first podcast, so that's super cool. We also have Nick Laufenberg here as well. Nick Laufenberg joins us on pretty much all things kind of PRS, long-range precision related. That is the topic at hand, because Mark and I have embarked on the journey of building custom long-range rifles. And Mark pats his that he's built here. The idea that we wanted to do was to have somewhat of a, we'll call it, quote, entry-level build. Now, granted, all things are relative here, so we went as far as entry-level being something that was still probably, for some of you who haven't even considered long-range precision yet, you still might think that's a bit expensive, but again, all relative here. We did that. That was my build, but then we really came down here to Missouri to build Mark's, which is more of the Gucci high-end, really precision. Nick and I built my gun, whereas we had Isaiah, the gunsmith, build Mark's gun. We got to see the process happen. That's some of what we'll talk about here today. And then we got to do some shooting here with both of our guns and compare them side by side today as well. And it's been quite telling. Pretty interesting stuff. So anyway, without further ado, though, we ought to let Isaiah introduce himself. Isaiah, tell the listeners who you are, what you do, how you got into what you do. Yeah.
Well, I'm Isaiah Curtis. I live in Northeast Missouri. Lived here my whole life. Started shooting. Shot from the time I was a child, really, but always grew up hunting, chasing stuff all over the Midwest pretty well, and really got into long-range shooting, truth be known, to kind of become more of an efficient hunter. Started shooting a lot, or competitively, I guess, probably about 6 years ago. Started in the Missouri Steel Tactical Series, and just kind of went from there. Started building my own rifles, just more or less out of self-defense, I guess. You know, just trying to do what I could, and something I really enjoyed doing. And so I took the plunge and decided I was going to do it full time, and that's what I'm doing today.
That's what you're doing now, yeah. So you have Curtis Custom Weapons.
Yes, sir.
That is your shop. And, we got to witness this process here, and seeing it all happen, seeing you work in the lathe, and all the craftsmanship and just conscientiousness that has to go towards every single detail that goes into one of these rifles here is pretty impressive. How did you learn to do all this stuff? It seems like around here you guys pretty much figure out how to do dang near everything yourself.
Well, you do. I had a very good mentor, not per se in rifle building, but as far as a machinist goes. I had one of the best mentors in the country, Daryl Richardson. He's taught me a lot about everything machine-wise. And as far as the rifle building goes, you know, when I was doing my own, it started off like a lot of other people's, kind of trial and error. You know, ask a few questions to some people that I trusted along the way, and just kind of went from there. You know, once you build a few of them, and then you start chasing, you know, how can I make them more accurate? How can this happen? Try to get everything, all the stars aligned, and much like everything else in life, sometimes you try something and it didn't work out. Sometimes you try it and it worked great. So I just took the ones that worked great and went forward with them, and that's where we are today.
Yeah. What's the first gun that you tinkered with as you kind of started getting into gunsmithing?
A 308 Winchester was the first rifle that I ever built.
Can't go wrong with that. I mean, very forgiving cartridge, right?
You
got that. Tons of ammo out there that you could toy around with after it was built.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
It was, if I remember correctly, and it's been a while, but I think I had like 28 hours in the build.
Just paying attention to
because
every
I
single...
would put it together and I'd talk myself out of it being together correctly, and I would take it apart and I'd remeasure stuff and I would put it back together, and then it was meticulous as could be, but it was pretty nerve-wracking, the first one, and then once it worked really well. Actually, it shot really well, and then I think the following week I did a 6.5 Creed barrel for the same action. And then it just kind of started evolving into, okay, I'm gonna do this cartridge this week, or I'm gonna do this, and I just kept switching them back and forth on the action, shooting whichever one for that upcoming match or that upcoming weekend. And I finally decided that I was gonna actually start a business and do it. I had a lot of requests, a lot of people asking about doing a rifle for them, so I dove into it and never have regretted it.
Right on. That's awesome. So, Nick, why don't you, so you helped out a lot in this sort of journey that we've been on, especially with figuring out sort of the logistics of how these rifles would get put together and sort of keeping each individual consumer, if you will, in mind. Everything from the accessories that get put on each gun, to the optics, obviously, which we'll get into a little bit, and then how it was going to be put together. Like I said, you and I built our rifle, or I should say my rifle, because I think you've been already gravitating towards wanting to claim marks as your own. But
back off, Nick.
Yeah, but how it was going to get put together, all that stuff. So and we're recording this too. We'll see how many episodes come out of this, but let's just right now pretend this is the main one because we want to make it a real good one. But let's go through and take us through the mindset of somebody getting into PRS, what they're going to need. I think that one thing, and we'll just point out right off the bat, that might be a critical component that we are leaving out, is that we wanted to talk about like custom building a rifle. Certainly there are other avenues that you can go to probably get into something like PRS or competitive long-range shooting. You could get a factory gun that's just already set up, already put together, already built, and then maybe put a different stock on it that you like better, a couple of different accessories. We wanted to kind of take it the element that a lot of AR builders, people who put an AR together where they get the receiver, they get the barrel, they start piecing all that stuff together. That's the route we wanted to go. So keep that in mind.
We kind of did the A to Z, but two different paths.
Yeah, exactly. So talk to people a little bit about the idea of somebody taking the more, quote, entry-level approach versus the more, hey, I'm sending it to a really competent gunsmith. It's going to be more money involved, and the parts that you're thinking of too.
Yeah, so my first thought when we talked about this project was I wanted to make sure that both rifles were something that I would say a talented shooter could go out and be very competitive with. Obviously, with the one that you and I put together, that one is something that the average Joe with the most basic tools at his disposal can put together in their own garage. And, the rifle itself, functions great, shoots really well, but it is missing that little bit of, I don't want to say lackluster because it did perform quite well, but that extra note of quality and performance that you get out of a truly custom-built rifle. Mm-hmm. Like you said, the whole AR builder, it's kind of similar to that in many respects. The guy can go on and order, have the action shipped to his local dealer, be able to go pick up everything, go home, and put together in a night. For anybody watching this episode, if you watch the footage of me and Jim putting it together, I had never put one together. My father had done several, and he kind of gave me some quick instructions over the phone, so I had no idea what the hell I was doing, and it's going to be pretty obvious in the video, but it still performed. It did its job. And it was one of those things where I know if I take somebody like Isaiah here, who's a national level world-class shooter, and hand him that rifle, he's still going to go to that match and perform very well.
Yeah.
However, you take somebody who's not quite as good and you hand them that rifle that Isaiah built there, and they're probably going to perform better than they would have if they had used the rifle that we built. So it's kind of
That's fair.
It's interesting that you can still do it for fairly inexpensive and get a good performance, but being able to do it yourself versus having somebody like Isaiah build it for you there is something to that too.
Yeah. No, so let's talk a little bit about the parts then that went into this, because I'm sure that realistically speaking, this could have been done probably cheaper even than we did it, or less expensive than even we did it on our, quote, entry-level gun. But again, you said you wanted to have it where... And I feel I've sort of matured to the point where I see this now. It's kind of the old buy once, cry once saying, it's a little bit of like, if it's out of necessity, I get it. You're just going to have to deal with maybe some of the frustrations that come along with this. But it is better, I think, in so many ways to find yourself being less frustrated with things and maybe spend a little bit more. But even so, we did so pretty economically here. So what is this? This is what we call a Remage here, and then compare it to what we've done with the one that Isaiah put together.
Yeah, so your build, the more economical one, is going to be just a trued-up Remington 700 action. It's using a Criterion barrel with a Savage barrel nut system. It's one that if you have the proper headspace gauges, you can screw on there, tighten down that barrel nut, and it's ready to rock. I think that when people watch some of the footage that we have, we found out that our way of doing it, having less experience, our head spacing obviously was not quite as precise as the way that Isaiah does his, which is, I think, just a learning curve. Once you do a few of them, you probably get better at it. But that one comes, the way we have that set up is in a KRG Bravo chassis. It's a more entry-level chassis. It's got enough adjustability that you would need to be really everything that you would require to compete in like a precision rifle sport like PRS or NRL. We did outfit that with an ARCA rail on the fore end. That one,
I fought Nick on that one because I thought it was too fancy.
Well, it is.
Now I like it.
It is one of those accessories that it's not required. We could have slapped a pick rail on there and gone that route. We could have just put it right on the sling swivel stud too. But
our bipod, yep.
Having that ARCA rail was not much of an expense, and it does allow you to have a lot more adjustability. Also gives you a nice flat bearing surface should you want to put, be shooting off a barricade, stuff like that. The other thing that we did was we used a Harris bipod, very tried and true bipod, very efficient, very functional, very durable. And
I noticed Isaiah using that on one of his guns.
Yep, Isaiah uses
I felt real
too.
good about myself.
Yeah, people don't talk well enough about the Harris, but there are a lot of very high level shooters that still love their Harris bipods. And then we put a ARCA rail adapter on there so we could slide it back and forth on the ARCA wherever we wanted, and that pretty much completes that build except for the scope and the rings.
Yeah, went with a Strike Eagle 5-25 and the precision match rings.
It does have a very efficient Patriot Valley arms muzzle brake on there, which, being that we're shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor, it's not super high recoil by any means, but it does tame it down quite a bit.
Yeah, and real quick too, where did we get all that stuff?
So we got a lot of it from Northland Shooting Supply.
Right.
Those guys are great over there. Then we got the other portions from KRG, and then we ordered the bipod directly from Harris.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Patriot Valley muzzle brake from Patriot Valley.
Right.
Gotcha.
So, Isaiah, what then goes into, I remember joking around, aside from the fact that Nick and I had to put the dang thing together 4 times and take it apart, whatever. We just kept forgetting parts. Really, it was just a matter of excitement and lack of reading directions.
Yeah.
But as we put it together, I remember thinking to myself, it's shocking, how sort of easy it seems, I mean, you just kind of take the receiver here, slap a barrel on, tighten it down, and check the little go, no-go thing, and okay, we were off to the races. What is it that's so much different that you're doing? Like, we're starting out, this is, Mark, you went with a proof barrel, so it's carbon wrapped, it's big old bowl barrel kind of style. But you're actually cutting threads into the barrel. You're actually removing material away from the barrel that you can snug it up to a receiver. What is it that's so much different about that makes it so much?
Well, the time that it takes, when you're putting on a like a criterion such as your build, somebody has already put in that time for you. Somebody has already done the threading of the tenon. They've already done the chambering. They've already done, the majority of the time that is consumed. When you start with a blank, it's kind of like starting with a clean canvas. You just you take some measurements as we did at the shop yesterday. To your action, start laying everything out, get everything running true zeros, bore center line, and start the build from there.
Maybe talk a little bit deeper on like that full zeros, because that was something we spent a lot of time on. Really, it's like we focused so much time on really just one specific part of the rifle, but it was so critical to get everything about that right.
That's absolutely correct. You can, you want as minimal as possible of run out on bore center line when you're getting ready to do anything with them. You want everything square with the bore. So trying to get that down to 1/10,000th is absolutely paramount in accuracy, keeping everything consistent. An offset bore, if you chamber it, I know we talked about this some yesterday, but it can enlarge your chamber size, which creates problems down the road if you're reloading. Could potentially, if it was really bad, create problems with a dangerous problem, but especially with reloading, so on. That's one of the things that I think no matter what gunsmith in the country will all agree on. That's one of the few things that very few will disagree on, that the closer to zeros you can make them run, the better it's going to be, the more accurate the rifle's going to be. And it's never proven me wrong that way, so I try to stick with what works and what works well. And I know sometimes we spent quite a bit of time up there yesterday, but sometimes it seems like it's almost impossible to get them to run zeros. Just it's one of those things that can either fight you, or sometimes 5 minutes and you're running good. But you definitely, everything works off of a center axis in it. Everything in the whole rifle works off that. So we just try to keep everything straight, true, action true to the barrel, chamber true to the action, everything throughout.
And if you actually were doing that measurement off the outside of the barrel, we found that it's not always the same. You don't always necessarily the spot that you would keep it where it's all centered up and true and running zeros on the bore. If you then put the same sort of
indicator
on the outside of the barrel, then you're running it, and all of a sudden you can see like, whoa, the bore might not actually necessarily be either perfectly in the center of this barrel blank or this big giant barrel, or there may be just like this slight kind of oblongness to the outside or something, which was kind of weird to think. Because usually you just look at a barrel and your eyes perceive it. That's just like a nice round circle.
Looks like it's in the center to me.
Yeah, you weren't going to notice that with the naked eye.
But we're dealing with that particular barrel. We was dealing with 5.5 thousandths.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, your eyes are never going to notice that without that type of equipment, indicator tools to show you what it was actually doing. Nobody would have ever been to the wiser, but it's definitely, that's something that is almost expected to me. Bore center line and OD of the barrel are very seldom within a thousandths of one another.
Right.
They're typically in that 5 to 7. It's not really an issue whatsoever as long as we're going to work off bore center line anytime we're doing any threading, chambering, anything such as that. So the OD of the barrel is strictly cosmetic at that point. It doesn't do anything as far as the integrity of it or accuracy. So
yeah.
And so to account for that variance, or you removed material from the outside diameter, right?
I did, but not. We had to cut the tenon down to get our dimension for our action, which
right.
We used a Defiance ruckus, so it was a inch 062, 16 threads per inch.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what that offset was, we was going to have to cut that tenon down to inch 062.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
yeah, you were going to get there anyway.
Yeah, we was going to get there regardless. It didn't matter. Didn't matter what we had to take. That's what we had to do to build our shoulder or tenon, so we could thread it and screw the action on.
As long as you're centered up on the bore, then
nothing else really
whatever
matters.
You're cutting off around the outside, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
You're going to end up centered up. And again, that 5-10 thousandths, like you're saying, too, once you actually get it to your eye and you actually end up putting it on the rifle, somebody might think, well, is it going to look weird when it's on? No, it doesn't at all. It's imperceivable.
You'll never know it.
Yeah. So it seemed like and I'm glad you mentioned, too, because we were talking about parts on the other rifle. We got this Defiance action, really well known for being a super high quality action. Lots of good parts in here. We got this proof barrel. We got the Whiskey 3 chassis that it went in, correct?
Yeah,
By
Whiskey
KRG.
3 from KRG, Kinetic Research Group. Fantastic, very adjustable chassis. That one's actually the competition chassis, so it has an integral Arca rail built right into the aluminum forend. So a little bit more rigidity, and you don't have to bolt things together to actually attach that rail. It's just there.
Yep. A little bit fancier MDT bipod, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Trigger Tech Diamond.
Yeah, that's right.
Trigger Tech Diamond
mentioned
Trigger,
that.
amazing.
That's something that I think everybody noticed today pretty well is,
Yep.
the difference in, let's say, a factory trigger or production trigger versus an aftermarket is absolutely huge.
That we did.
That's a big difference.
That's one thing that, in my early years of hunting, or you talk to guys and be like, oh man, I got this trigger, and you're like, yeah, a trigger's a trigger, and then you start, getting your hands on a couple nice ones, and you're like, oh no, that's actually like a giant deal. Like that's a really big deal.
Trigger is not just a trigger. So that's what goes into kind of our recipe here. But obviously, having a recipe is having a recipe. It's having a good chef to put it all together. That's another part of the essential part of the equation. It seemed like, obviously a lot of time was spent getting this barrel just right to fit into our action. And I'm sure on other guns that you've done in the past, if you're doing something with more of Nick was saying, more of a Manor stock, more of a traditional stock or something like that, not this chassis style. There's other stuff you're going to have to do, and you're going to have to go in and open up certain things or whatever on the actual stock. But a great deal of what you're doing is kind of making the, I guess what a lot of people just kind of somewhat jokingly refer to as just the stick, right? I mean, because when you have this precision bolt-action rifle, that's kind of what it is. It's just a big, long barrel with an action on the end that just does the job of getting the cartridge chambered up and ready to go boom. So a lot of time was spent on getting that barrel to fit into the action. How is it that you get it so precise? What is different that you're doing compared to, let's say, just some mass-produced factory bolt-action rifle?
Well, spending that time that we spent getting everything running 100% true, not close. When we started, we was 100%. We was spot on. That's where we want to be, and that's something that no matter, even with some of the best equipment in the world, if you want to mass produce it, the quality is going to go down as far as the being able to get that run out on them. Anything that's going to happen faster isn't going to happen as precise for the most part.
Because you gotta assume that if you're cranking out thousands of rifles, for example, they can't have as tight a tolerance as maybe as you're trying to achieve, because they're making so darn many, they would be throwing out parts left and right all over the place because they wouldn't be fitting together.
Yeah.
So they got to open them up maybe a little bit more to try and allow them to, well, if I grab this barrel from over here in this lot and I grab this receiver from over here in this, they'll go together.
Yeah.
That's something that I think I took from watching Isaiah work on that rifle yesterday. If you're doing a mass-produced rifle, you have to be able to grab any one of those barrels that are on the shelf that's supposed to go with that action and put them on any of the actions that are in that box over there, and it's supposed to work. Well, there's tolerance stacking there. Watching Isaiah take that barrel and fit it to that action as precisely as it was is, precision rifles, having everything done to such a precise measure, mean, I've never seen nothing but amazing quality out of everything he's done, and I think I can see why now. It's pretty apparent once I watch him go through the process.
Mm-hmm.
When we got to the the go no go gauge part, and he's like, this is where we want it, and and it was just spot on. I mean, you close the bolt with the go gauge. I mean, she just drops right in. It's almost like just zero resistance. And then the no go. I mean, it locks up. I mean, bam, like it. I mean, there's no slop. There's no halfway. It's just like, yep, she's not gonna go.
Let's explain a go no go gauge here real quick too for those not familiar. I know I
and maybe run out too.
That's your overall center on bore line.
Yeah. If you got a lot of run out, then that means you're going off
center. It's
center.
basically making an egg shape or
okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So was one of the big killers of time yesterday for us, was getting everything on that end of it done. But they what else? What was the first question?
We're talking about go no go gauges.
Oh yeah, go no go
we threw
gauges.
two questions at once.
Yeah.
At you, but yeah,
I know.
Anyway, explaining what those
the
are.
first
exactly.
one was for me.
That's all right.
There's actually three gauges. I guess there's three battle gauges, so to speak. There's a go, there's a no-go, and there's a field gauge. But in gunsmithing, typically a go and a no-go gauge is plenty good enough. Most times you can get away with one or the other. But to have it that way, that if it closes on a no-go or a go gauge and it's a clean close, you don't want to feel any resistance on it. And then when you put a no-go in it, you don't want to be able to push the bolt down, period. You want it to just start down and lock up tight. And that'll maintain that minimum clearance. And that's something that it doesn't matter what action or what barreled action it is. If you shoot for that same setup on your Remington action versus your Defiance action, if we set them both up that way with that particular set of gauges, then you guys can physically shoot each other's hand-loaded ammunition, or you can set your resizing die up and it's going to bump back the same on both rifles.
Okay.
So just trying to maintain that throughout.
Yeah.
Not that, the barrels are definitely not interchangeable between your rifles, but the ammunition could be. Trying to keep that tolerance as tight as possible, and you definitely do not want to be able to close the bolt on a no-go gauge at all.
And then like what they physically are too, if you haven't ever seen one, they look sort of like the back half of a cartridge, like a case.
Yeah.
And they're just these silver little. They don't look like a full cartridge, fully loaded cartridge or anything, but they are like these silver kind of bullet-looking things with a back end on it, like the what do they call it? The base of your case, I suppose, right?
Like a piece of. They look like a piece of brass. They have no neck.
Yeah.
They've got a shoulder but no neck, and they headspace with those particular cartridges. Headspace off the datum point of the shoulder.
Okay.
Now, like on a rimmed Magnum, 300 Win Mag, 7 millimeter Magnum, anything that's a rimmed, they headspace off the rim typically.
Okay.
Your gauges that'll come with those are really, really short, like an inch long, and they just have a rim on them. So,
okay.
When you say rimmed, you're talking about like the same thing as a belted
a belted cartridge.
Okay, got it.
I'm sorry, I said rim, but a belted Magnum, 300 Win Mag, 338 Winchester,
7 millimeter Remington Magnum,
7 rim mag.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They headspace off the belt on them rather than the datum point of the shoulder.
Oh,
Okay.
That would be confusing if you didn't know that.
Yes, yeah. When you first look at them, you pull them out and you see a cartridge that's 3 inches long and
Yeah, that
a
little bit.
headspace gauge that's 3/4 of an inch long, and it's
that trip you up maybe.
yeah.
Why? What are they actually doing then? So the fact is that when you're essentially sort of. I guess we were determining how far the barrel sets into the receiver, essentially.
Well, with a headspace gauge, we already set the barrel up to the receiver initially.
Right.
So what we did was we set the tenon up on the barrel, and we stop the barrel short of the front of the bolt lugs.
Mm-hmm.
And
which
then
we'll talk about in a bit here too, why we're doing that.
Then we cut our bolt nose recess in,
Yes.
and we set it up with our clearance on bolt nose recess. So all we was doing with the gauges was determining how deep we put the chamber in the barrel.
Oh, that's right. It is the chamber.
By at that point, the tenon was already done on the cartridge,
Right.
or on the action. So
Right.
all we was doing was creeping up on the chamber to get it to the exact measurement that we wanted.
Right. And why is that so important then, that, like, what's so special about this go gauge that when you can push the bolt forward and have it just go right in and drop down nicely, why is that so important to achieve? And, you know, it's really paramount that you don't have it where you can let the no-go gauge drop down. What's the difference between the two?
I mean, it comes to a safety issue. On the short side of it, you know, there's a SAMI length for every cartridge, or most every cartridge. So if you're bringing out boxed Hornady ammunition like we was shooting today, you know, they've got they're set at a standard length. If you get it to where it's too short of a chamber, you either won't close the bolt on a factory ammunition, or it becomes difficult to close on it. You'll feel resistance on it. So you want to be over that tolerance, which is your go gauge, but you definitely don't want the no-go gauge to close on it, because at that point in time it becomes dangerous.
Is that because you've seated the cartridge in too far?
The cartridge has too much space between the bolt and the front of the chamber, and it potentially can cause an explosion. It's
not necessarily. It's not being supported.
It's completely unsupported until it's fired,
right,
and then it blows out to the chamber forward, wherever it is. The brass is going to adhere to it. The brass will be the same size as the chamber when it comes out, but we want to minimize that ability to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So would that possibly induce like the cartridge itself to erupt, to break open?
It absolutely can.
Okay, so that's where you could have that explosion coming instead of going down the barrel, it's going outwards.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, now I can finally sort of picture that. And there again, to your point, if you put it in there and you got the you got the go gauge to close just fine, but you kind of just reamed out that chamber a little bit too far and that it closed on the no-go gauge, you're kind of starting a little bit all back over again, right? Because now you got to go and you got to take the barrel back out again and kind of shave everything down, so to speak.
Yeah.
And
you got to you try your best not to ever go too far. It's always easier to creep up on it than it is to have to work backwards.
Easier to remove material than to put it back.
Yes.
And that's definitely something we saw throughout that process was
remove
slow. A little bit of material, you know, and then you'd be meticulous about cleaning that material and getting it out of the way and lubricating, and you know, it was pretty laborious, really.
Yeah.
It is. It's very repetitious. You know, there's a lot of that stuff that, you know, when we was actually doing the chambering, you know, cutting a chamber 20 thousandths at a time, when you're dealing with a 2-inch or inch 850 chamber, you know, that becomes a lot of time.
I'm glad we weren't doing it for like a 300 whatever, who knows what, DRC or something, 28 nozzler, yeah.
But you don't want to let your chip load get on your reamer and get, you don't want your chip load too heavy, or it'll start scratching chambers. It'll start doing a lot of other stuff.
Sure.
So you kind of got to take it in little steps and just take your time. It does. Some days it gets monotonous, but it's it just seems to be the best way to do it and get good, consistent, clean cut chamber.
Well, it certainly looks like paid off watching you do it. I mean, it was meticulous. It was monotonous. But the overall quality of the product at the end was, I mean, we were all just baffled at how small groups were shooting at 700 yards with it. I mean, it was fantastic.
That is true. Can you go back and explain the 5/10,000ths thing where you got to leave some space for the bolt head and the bolt lugs and stuff like that? What's
5,000ths is what we set it up. So,
okay.
We
don't
want
do 5/10,000ths. That sounds like it's way too small. You might blow yourself up.
You'd probably have a little friction at that point. But anyway, the front of the bolt lugs, we try to get them right on 5/1000ths off the back of the barrel.
So they're not touching the back of the
They're
barrel.
not touching the back of the barrel, but physically they're 2 sheets of notebook paper, you know, in layman's terms, between the front of the bolt lugs and the back of the barrel tenon. So, and then on the bolt nose recess again, we're doing the same thing there. We're putting 5/1000ths clearance between the front of the bolt nose itself and the rear of the chamber. So we don't want any resistance, but we don't want excessive distance there either, because the deeper you put that, let's say our bolt nose recess, we would have went an extra 10/1000ths. So we'd have put 15 on it instead of 5. That's an extra 10/1000ths of unsupported case in the chamber, sticking out of the back of the chamber.
Problem again.
Which can lead to, you know, it can rupture. If it gets excessive there, it definitely can cause some case swelling. We talked about moisture this morning, you know, what moisture does. Well, if you go to a match and it's raining, or you're out hunting and you're in a torrential downpour, there's going to be pressure built. You know, a lot of shooters, a lot of hunters have seen where it blows primers because the pressure gets pretty excessive.
Yeah. There's just hydraulic pressure in that chamber.
It is. It takes up a lot of valuable space, and it creates high pressure. Well, if that high pressure happens, and we want to keep as little unsupported case as possible, because if that pressure would happen and you happen to have an extra 20,000 unsupported case, that's more room for problems to happen.
Now I'm curious, because I am thinking to myself, like, when you really think about the fact that these cases are made out of brass, it's not exactly what most people go to as, like, hey, we need a really strong metal. And then, so now I'm thinking, like, do people have less of that kind of stuff? Is there less danger if you're using steel case, or is it still the same amount of danger? Because I know there's some drawbacks to, you know, whatever. But now this is just purely out of curiosity. Is there less of a chance you're going to have something blow up if you got a steel case versus a brass case?
I would be lying to you if I told you for sure yes or no on that. Yeah,
I'm not going to be the guy to test
steel, I would think would have a little more rigidity. But then again, the whole reason for brass cases is the ability to anneal them, reload them.
Yeah.
You know, the reusability of them. It's so easy to work with. It's a soft enough material to reshape, reform, resize, but yet rugged enough to contain the pressure that we're putting the rifles up to, or the loads up to. And
it's impressive.
It really is an amazing material when you think about, like, what you can do, and, like, the fact that it is, I guess, malleable enough to reshape and reform and reuse, but also withstand
55,000 PSI cup pressure.
That's crazy.
That'll do.
It's...
Thanks, brass. That's cool.
This message brought to you by brass.
That's right. Just in general, brass. You know, one thing that I was reminded of as we were doing this is, so we got an in-house photographer at Vortex. You know, does all the catalog, website images, and stuff like that. If you, I've gone in and seen some of these photo sessions, and guy's been doing it for like 40 years or something like that. Maybe that, I don't know, a long time. Basically, if you go in, you'll see him. He's toying around all the time with lights, right? He's got lights all over the place, and he's got some thing down on the table that he's going to get a picture of, you know, and he's got little filters that the light's going through. He's got little pieces of cardboard that it's shining off of, different colors. Some of the cardboard's black, some of it's white. He's getting everything just right. I mean, it takes him to take one photo that's going to go into our catalog. It could take him the full day, or maybe the half day, whatever. Longer than you would expect, you know, especially when you're somebody who just goes over to your plate of food in some hipster restaurant and just, you know, snaps your picture on your iPhone in 5 seconds. And I remember asking him, like, so riddle me this, right? We got a team of graphics people as well, like graphic
designers.
Graphic designers, yeah. I don't know why I blanked on that name. But we got a team of graphic designers, all really good at Photoshop. Can kind of make anything look like anything, right? I said, so riddle me this. Why are you taking so much time on getting your photos set up just right with all this lighting, when you could just snap the picture basically on your iPhone these days and send it off to a graphic designer, and they can do everything in Photoshop? And he was saying, well, there's basically two different ways of doing a really nice photo. He's like, I can go through and get the lighting so perfect that I've essentially done Photoshop for them, like, already. And it takes more time, but when the picture is done, and I've seen it, he'll take a picture, no editing whatsoever, it looks Photoshopped, like so perfect. Or he said, or I can just take a really kind of just like crappy photo and have them go in and they'll spend then all the time editing it and getting it to look just perfect. And that was reminding me of what I've seen a lot of people do with rifles versus ammo, right? So you'll have somebody go in and they'll spend, like what we've seen here, like Isaiah spends all the time, just meticulous detail, monotonous things, doing processes exactly right, measuring things perfectly. And you're thinking to yourself, like, dude, I know people who just get the factory gun and then they'll just load ammo and they'll test everything, just like arduously testing all these different, powder charges and
load
bullets
ladders
and brass and this, and ladder testing and all that. And they'll get a factory gun to shoot just right. But what I'm seeing you do is you're almost doing all this work on the forend, so that way we shot lots of different kinds of ammo through these guns today. And pretty much every single one of them was shooting, well, actually, I don't even have to say pretty much. Every single one of them was shooting sub-MOA, no doubt about that.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Most of them, except for I think one of them, were shooting half MOA or better.
I think even that one was under a half. I in all honesty, there was, they all shot great, but I think
that's when you know you're being picky,
right? I know, but you're 100% right on the nuts with that. Having a great baseline to start off with. You can take most any ammunition and put that in that rifle that Isaiah built there, and it's going to shoot good.
Yes.
You can take the same rifle that me and Jim built there and shoot it, and it's going to shoot good. You can hand load, tune the ammunition for the rifle and have it shoot amazing, but if you put that same time and energy into hand loading for a rifle like Isaiah built there, it's going to shoot absurdly well. I mean, there was a couple of groups down there that were, three, 4 rounds in literally a single hole.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can't ask for it to be better than that. It's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a little bit of what we wanted to get at here, being that, essentially there's two routes one could go. I'm sure that we would, with a lot of tinkering, a lot of time, probably some ladder tests, some loading, switching up or adjusting a trigger a little bit here and there, we could maybe get our gun working or shooting about as good as Mark's, where, Mark sent it off to Isaiah. Isaiah put in all the time and work. He spits it out and Mark gets it, and then he just buys factory ammo that the factory already loaded up for him and goes out and he shoots one perfect hole at 100 yards. Meanwhile, we're putting in a lot of work, maybe spending a little bit less money, but, it takes a lot on our part to then get it to even close to that level.
Well, and I've got, essentially 3 off-the-shelf loads that work famously, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where you're having to do that work on the back end to tweak and this and adjust and really find that one load that's going to do really well.
Right.
That's something that I feel really strongly on, and it's kind of, we talked about this earlier when we were shooting groups at 100, what they would translate to at 500, what they would translate to at 1,000, what the minute of angle diversion would be, one rifle that'll shoot, physically shoot a 5-inch group at 1,000, one rifle that shoots a 10-inch group. I hear a lot of people talk about like entry-level guns, and believe me, I'm one of the biggest ducks in the puddle of trying to get people involved in the sport. But it's kind of the whole system is kind of a little bit backwards in that aspect, because a entry-level shooter really needs to have a rifle with as little of error in it as possible.
Yes.
Because they're going to put some error. Everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But, physically, you could take a handful of the top shooters in the United States and put them behind most any rifle.
Right.
And they're going to shoot pretty well with it because they have worked relentlessly to remove all the human error that they can from it.
Right.
So it kind of works on a backward scale in that aspect. You take a brand new shooter and they come out with a mediocre rifle, let's just say, or one that's, let's say we're taking that rifle that'll hold a 5-inch group at 500 yards, a 1 MOA group versus a half MOA group. They've already opened their odds up of or their opportunity up of missing the target without even taking their error into account.
Yeah,
exactly. And the same thing goes for tinkering a lot with, let's say, a mediocre rifle, right?
Right.
And for the reference too, at this point in time, when we're saying mediocre rifles, we're not referring to our entry level gun here, because I would say that's definitely a step above mediocre. But anyway,
Big time.
let's say you
Yes.
come out with a rather mediocre rifle, though. There are ways to make it shoot better, right? You can do this thing called, I've heard people talk about bumping it back, right? Like where you take factory loaded ammo and you bump the seating depth or something like that back a little bit further. You do a lot of testing. You go out, you purchase a bunch of reloading equipment, you start loading up your own ammunition, you find what that rifle likes. But all these things that we're talking about, your entry-level person who was just listening to me, like, I can just picture their blood pressure boiling, right? As you're just sort of like,
Yep.
oh, I got this rifle. It's really affordable. It's going to work. It should kind of work okay, but how do I make it work better? It's like, well, like, get all this reloading equipment, learn all this stuff, like, start going to the range every day and testing and ladder, do this, don't do that. And all of a sudden now it's like, oh, I almost need to be a pro to actually figure out how to make this entry-level gun work really well. So you almost just make somebody into a pro, and then they have to buy a bunch of equipment or spend a bunch of time, and
it may not sound fun anymore.
Right.
Or
and there is an element too of, like, your time is valuable, and so when you think about how much money you want to invest in something, also think about that your time has value to it as well. And sometimes getting something that has had, somebody else's time really put a lot into it, and making it so good and making it such that it's not necessarily going to be the thing slowing you up, and that you can work on yourself a little bit more rather than trying to have to spend so much time working on the piece of equipment.
Part of the reason why I have rifle done by Isaiah is that the rifle is going to outperform me every day. I can be, on my bad days, I could be a minute of angle shooter, but I know the rifle is going to be shooting the tenths or the quarter minute all the time. So if I'm shooting a group that's a minute, I know it's me. And being able to, the hardest thing to work on, but the most important thing to work on is yourself. So if you have the equipment to get the job done right out the get-go, being able to come back and, okay, what do I need to start training on?
Right.
That's super important for anybody getting this game, and that's, equipment's very important. Having good equipment right out the gate, you don't have to get caught up on equipment, though. You don't need to buy a different stock, different scope, different rings. You don't, not that type of, but starting off with a rifle that's going to shoot well and then work on yourself is more important, I think, than anything.
Well, you look at it, and it's really nice to be able to have the confidence to be when you're trying to progress and become a better shooter, to essentially remove this giant set of variables, right? You're like, well, I know it's not this, right? Mm-hmm. So then it's like, okay, so maybe it is my grip, or maybe I'm imparting this, or my trigger press, or whatever, any number of things that it could be. But man, when you only have to focus on you, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think, you're talking, I kind of maybe misspoke a little bit in some ways, because once you get into something, like, part of the fun is the figuring out and the tinkering.
Yeah.
But
you got to get into it first.
But you got to get into it first.
You do, and the talent level in this sport in precision rifle shooting has grown so much in the past 5 or 6 years that I guess in some cases it's almost a little bit humbling to people. They come into it and they didn't feel like they'd done well, performed well. Well, that's because there's a lot of people out there that's been doing it for 10, 15 years that has put in way more time, and definitely nobody needs to get discouraged. No matter what, if they're at an entry-level rifle or a mid-level or a top end or whatever it is, there's always a way around it. There's always something you can work through if you need to. If you're doing your best to save as much money as you can, and you are on that entry-level rifle, try working with the load a little bit. Try some different ammunition. If it doesn't like one particular box of ammo, try a different grain, a different bullet weight. Try a different brand, manufacturer. There's a lot of things that they can try to maximize what they've got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One other thing that I thought was pretty cool that goes into what you do as a gunsmith and taking so much time to try and make everything, I would venture to say, obviously you do a lot of guns come through here, and a lot of each one is unique and different. But for example, both our guns are 6.5 Creedmoors here. I'm sure you've done plenty of 6.5 Creedmoors. And you were saying that, let's say at a match somebody's 6.5 Creedmoor happens to go down somehow. You've put in so much work to making it such that you make your 6.5 Creedmoors in such a way that somebody who maybe has to use somebody else's rifle that was also built by you at a match would still at least be able to use their own ammunition they had, whether it was factory or loaded, and it would at least perform pretty close to about the same.
Yeah. I mean, if they're both shooting hand-loaded ammunition, that's a big variable.
Yeah.
One guy might like to shoot 147 grain Hornaday. One guy might like to shoot 130 grain Burgers. The next guy might want Sierra. So how it actually reacts to those. But what I was referring to was from a case standpoint, from a cartridge standpoint.
Right.
Yeah. The throats, the overall length of the bullet, everything's going to be pretty well spot on from there. So from that standpoint, heck, in some cases you could probably find that your ammo may shoot even better in somebody else's rifle, or they might decide that they need to switch what their recipe is at that point in time. But they'll function and be safe in each other's.
Yeah.
Well, that was like, we were shooting different factory ammo down here, and you had some of your 6.5 ammo that you loaded in other rifles that you had built, and that shot well, and it shot well out of this rifle too. But that was, of course, built by you to the same tolerances that you always use.
Absolutely. And that's just kind of a pet load, I guess.
Yeah.
Everybody's pet load with a 308 years ago used to be a 168 Sierra Match King, and 45 grains of Argot or whatever it was. Everybody had their little pet load for it, and that's just one that I have found through the years that always is. We can take that load, I am certain, with both of these rifles and tweak it a little bit and make it even better, but it's one that just always consistently gives me good results.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one that I like to just keep around, and it gives me a good reference point of, if something quirky's going on with a rifle, or I have a customer call and say, hey, this thing opened up and it's now shooting 2-inch groups, I can grab a handful of that, come out and shoot a couple 5-shot groups with it. And if it's truly shooting a 2-inch group, we need to go figure out what it is.
Right.
If it goes back to shooting little bitty groups, then we need to address what they've done in the reloading department, or what has went astray somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, reloading is one of those ones that can either really help you or hinder you. I've seen a lot of times where guys will reload because they want to get better performance, and I see their performance go down because they're not quite doing something right.
Right.
That's we talked about trimming brass and how a lot of people way over trim their brass, whether it be too far or too often.
Oh yeah, and then you get that. You were telling us about that.
Yeah, get a carbon
ring
ring in them. Yeah, I had a customer show up. It's been a couple of months ago, and I'm not making fun of him at all. Please don't think that I am. But he had a rifle that when it was done here, and it's only that particular barrel's only 4 or 5 months old. I shot it the sime way I shot your guys' rifle today. We broke in the barrel. It shot little bitty groups. He took it home, shot a few matches with it. He called me one day and said, yeah, it's I don't know what's going on with it, but it's kind of sporadic. It'll shoot like 2 in one hole and 2 in another hole, and then maybe one a little high. It's like shooting inch groups. Okay, bring it over. So he brought it back to me, and I went and got just a pet load for that particular cartridge, come out and shot a 150 thousandths group with it. So I said, let's see some of your ammo. So he hands me his ammo, and I look at it, and the bullet is clearly seated in 300 thousandths deeper than it should be. I mean, it was obvious with the naked eye of how short the bullet was. And I said, who's been messing with your seating die? I don't know, nobody that I'm aware of. Well, come to find out, somebody had been messing with his seating die. It was his nephew.
Oh my gosh!
And he had screwed the seating die way down on it. Well, he had never touched it, so he didn't worry about it.
He assumed it was right because he did
put
last
bullets
time.
in and started. So he was jumping bullets, 300,000s or 320,000s.
Wow.
So we pulled a bunch of bullets and re-neck-sized everything and put it all back together. His powder charge was great. Everything was spot on. It just didn't like that half-inch or 3/8 inch of jump that it was taking.
Yeah.
So, and once we did that, it went back to shooting little bitty groups for him, and it was all spot on. But that's just one of the things that a person, really may not account for, but it definitely comes into play.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's a good example of the level of precision that you're getting with these rifles, though. When you're going, man, this thing's shooting an inch, we got big problems.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. My expectations have changed dramatically over the last 10 years for sure. I've got a bunch of rifles that 15 years ago I would have sat here with you all saying I got a rifle that'll outshoot most anything. This rifle shoots really good. And now when I get them out for just the sake of conversation, and I'll come out with the same awesome load that I had back in the day, and I'll shoot them, and they shoot like 3/4 inch or inch, and I'm like, I ought to sell this. It doesn't shoot very good. My expectations have changed so much for accuracy that it's pretty baffling, I guess, anymore. It takes quite a bit for me to be impressed with them. I want to get the utmost accuracy that we absolutely can out of them for everybody.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk about this aspect of it. Let's say now somebody decides they want to go the custom gunsmith route, like Mark. I don't want to put the thing together. I want to have somebody else put it together for me.
Makes a whole lot of sense, Jim.
I know. Let's say they decide on that. What do they do next? Do they call you up first? Do they start looking for parts first? Do they just say, hey, whatever's the most expensive thing, I'll buy that and then send it to this guy?
That's kind of on the customer. If they want to get their own parts, I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. I typically keep all the upper end stuff in stock. A good supply of high quality barrels. Most all of the upper end actions that are on the market today, I try to keep. I keep a lot of Manor stocks. Tom Manor's Missouri boy, so I try to. He's always been really good to me, so I keep a lot of his stuff on hand. That's what I personally shoot. Not that there's anything wrong with any of the chassis setups or, there's a lot of good stuff out there. It's just what I keep. But if somebody wants something else, I'll sure enough get them what they want, or they can get it and send it to me. It makes no difference to me.
I was just going to say it is important to note for anybody who watches the video of like what we have for the rifle here from Mark. We kind of, I don't want to say went overboard, but we did everything to make it bougie for Mark. We didn't have to go the route of a carbon fiber barrel.
I've grown accustomed to a certain standard of living.
Right? Well, I mean, you see, I would say at most like PRS matches, you're not going to see carbon fiber barrels. They're almost all going to be a solid big chunk of steel. And one of the reasons why we went with carbon fiber is because it was more expensive. And Mark likes things light. And although that rifle's not light, it's also nowhere near as heavy as a lot of match rifles.
The fact is I could bend back into the truck bed and pick it up from a seated position, and most of Nick's guns or Scott Parks' guns, I can't do that with without having a hernia.
Even with the carbon fiber barrel, though, the way that rifle is set up, the way it's weighted right now, it balances well.
Yeah.
And balance is key. Weight overall is fine. It can be light, it can be heavy, but we want to try to keep that balance point as close to that front action screw as we can. That's where we want that balance point to be. It'll make the rifle react better when you're shooting off of a bag, or in a hunting scenario out of the fork of a tree, or whatever it may be. As long as you don't want to build a rifle that is tremendously heavy on the back and put a carbon fiber barrel on it, because it'll be light in the front, or vice versa. You don't want to do one that's tremendously light in the rear and have a inch 250 straight taper barrel for 30 inches, because it's gonna work the other way for you. So finding that balance point. My son's rifle weighs 8.5 pounds complete, and optic the whole 9 yards, and I shoot it off of gates and game changers and pretty much everything you can imagine, and it pretty well reacts the same as my 21-pound match rifle does, as far as point of impact and being able to watch trace go down range. So that rifle there, just it balances really well where it is. So
I find that the balance point on that one is about maybe an inch forward of the mag well, which if you're going to be putting something on a cattle gate or shooting, off really any type of barricade, we're down there shooting off of a game changer, you could set that rifle on top of there and walk away and it's not going to move.
Absolutely.
Right. So it takes a lot less muscle work to keep that thing steady.
I mean, it really does, sit just fine.
Yep.
Yeah, you want to try to keep it right in that front action screw area. If you can keep that balance point right in there when it's in its full dress, optic, bipod, that's, to me, that's kind of the ideal scenario of how to set them up to where they don't have a lot of change no matter what position you're put in. They don't have a huge point of impact change.
Yeah. Run us through real quick too. So, right here at this range, we broke in these guns before we went out and did a lot of shooting with them. We did a podcast before with Ian on barrel breaking, but I know there's different ways of doing it. Different people have different ways of doing it, and actually, it seems as though the way that we did it here worked great. And I know that Ian, obviously, I'm not going to question Ian. I mean, he's like, champion F-class shooter, whatever. So obviously his method works great, and I'm sure there's other methods out there that work great. But what was yours specifically? We all commented on the fact how your machining process was meticulous and at times monotonous, and your break-in process was meticulous and at times monotonous. But you didn't send like 100 rounds down the barrel to break it in. I think 6. Or something?
Yeah, well,
or 10, or
technically we was done at 5, really.
Yeah.
But it just everybody's got a little different outlook on that. Some people say brush the barrel. Some people say don't brush the barrel. Some, I try to go with the recommendation of barrel manufacturers to a point. But the old man that I learned my break-in procedure from was just an old bench rest guy, and he had wore out more barrels than I probably ever will in my life. So I listened to what he said. He had a reason behind everything that he did, and I just kind of started off with it, and I guess creature of habit, I just never ventured. It's never given me a reason.
It's working. It doesn't sound like it's broke.
Yeah, so
right.
I've just pretty much stuck with that same regiment throughout all the years. I've not ever.
Is it a secret sauce? Because I was very curious about some of the ingredients that went into it. I don't want to say it if it is a secret sauce.
It's not a secret sauce.
Because there was Zippo lighter fluid, WD-40, and barrel cleaning solvent.
Yep. Yeah. Butch's bore shine, which there's Hoppies makes some good bore cleaner, Vortex. There's goodles of good stuff out there. There really is. It's just, once again, what he recommended to me years and years ago was Butch's bore shine. I use it.
Non-aerosol.
Non-aerosol WD-40. I don't know why he said non-aerosol. I'm not a chemist. I don't know what's in aerosol that's not in non-aerosol, but he always told me non-aerosol. So
and Zippo lighter fluid.
Zippo lighter fluid. That was his concept on it, was that he never wanted to push a dry patch down a barrel. He always wanted some sort of fluid on it, and he said that it had a slight amount of graphite in it, and he said that was always his final bore, or final polish, was a a couple patches with just a light amount of Zippo lighter fluid on it. That's what I've always done. It's always worked. It seems like his theory was you never have to run a lot of foulers through it. You won't have an off shot or throwed shot because of a fouler. I've shot thousands, if not tens of thousands of rounds, testing a lot of theories of go clean a bore, come out and shoot a group with it, go straight into the group. And, maybe it's luck, maybe his theory's right, I don't know, but I don't want to get too far away from it just in case it isn't luck. So
It is funny when you first told me that, your process, the Zippo lighter fluid was one of those things I just kind of like, huh? But once I started doing that horrible thing that happens when you go to a match or something and you put that first round in the chamber and you shoot and you're like, why is my zero off? And then you start shooting a couple more and be like, okay, never mind, it's good now.
It came back.
I don't get that anymore. It's gone.
And we're back.
Yeah, and we're back. No, it's it's an interesting thing that I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life, I'm sure now.
That's kind of when I started doing it, I didn't ever see a negative result from it.
Right.
If anything, I seen positive results, so I just kind of run with it. And every time I see the man still to this day, that's one of the few things he ever asked me, or one of the first things he ever asked me is, "You still clean them barrels like I taught you how?" Yep, sure do.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And you basically we cleaned it first before we even shot because you want to make sure there weren't any burrs or anything like that from the machining process inside. That would be bad.
Yeah, any type of, just residual. Residual left over from acetone or brake clean or, any of that stuff. We want 100% clean bore before we ever start it.
And that was without a brush. That was just running the patch down.
That was running patches with lighter fluid on them. Just taking any type of dirt or anything that could have potentially got in it before we sent the first round. We don't want anything in there.
Yep. And then we shot, cleaned. We literally shot one shot.
Yep.
Cleaned, shot another shot, cleaned, shot another shot, cleaned, and then we took a couple more shots, and then we determined, pretty sure at that point she was good to go, right?
Yeah.
And every time you pulled that patch out, especially after that first shot when we cleaned it, you were checking for no copper, right? Just carbon from
no type of metal whatsoever. All we want to see on it is just carbon. Yeah. That's it.
We did the same thing with my gun too. For those out there wondering if you need to do it only with gunsmith guns or whatever, we did the same thing with my gun as well.
It's a good practice to follow, even if you're going and buying a factory production rifle. It's really good to do that because, the factory production rifles, I'm sure that they have a form of lubricant, both internal and external on the barrel.
Oh yeah,
because they don't want them rusting up in storage, shipment, whatever. And then you put them into a brick and mortar gun shop that maybe they set on the shelf for 2 months, and well, you know what dust and oil does. So,
right,
dust and oil is gonna it's gonna collect dust both inside and outside the barrel. So it's always a good idea to clean before you ever start shooting a new rifle. It's always a good idea to push some patches through it and get it clean. Make sure you swab that chamber when you're done. Get all the residual out of the chamber.
Yeah.
And
well,
then
I'm sure if there's a bunch of dust and other stuff in there as that bullet passes through the barrel, it's probably just grinding it in.
It is. It'll either embed it or, it could potentially cause an imperfection, depending on what the debris is. It could cause an imperfection in the bore that you may see for the rest of the life of the rifle. Not just a shot or two.
Great.
It could create a problem that maybe lasts forever. It's unknown.
Well, it's funny when we talk about ballistics and stuff. Internal ballistics of your bore when you shoot, when the bullet engages that rifling, that deformation of your bullet's affecting your BC. Now, if you had a small piece of metal shaving in your barrel, you shoot it, and that grinds down the barrel and deforms or changes the dynamics of that barrel a little bit. it's going to also alter the BC of your bullet. I mean, it's just going to change how that bullet performs when it leaves the muzzle.
It absolutely will. It, you know, any imperfections on your bullets. You know, I've seen a lot of stuff over the years, but I've seen people that, you know, put in a wrong neck bushing, and they have to pull their press handle hard enough to get the bullets to seat that they'll actually deform the bullet jacket. They'll put a ring around it that looks like a donut, you know, because they've got so much neck tension. Well, that in itself is going to cause a horrible amount of, you know, air turbulence. So any of that stuff, if you're loading your own ammo, any of that stuff that you can keep away from, you know, try not to dent the tips up, or, you know, try to keep everything as perfect and as similar from one shot to the other as you can. The more of those variables you can pull out, the more consistent it's going to be, and the more consistent you're going to be, more confidence you're going to have in your gun. And
one of the things that I really took from watching you do that with making sure that you have the chamber clean. We had a guy in consumer sales, Josh. He had a custom gun built, and every time he shot it, he was getting this dent in his cases. And we're like, what is causing this? Is there something wrong with the chamber? Trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Found out that one time it was cleaned, the chamber had not been cleaned out. And so he had a little bit of oil in the chamber. So as soon as he shot, that brass expands in the chamber, and that you can't really compress water or fluid
Hydraulic.
the way so you had a hydraulic dent form in every cartridge. And once we figured that out, just took a chamber mop in there, cleaned it out, and it was great. But it was a headache for so long because you couldn't figure out what was going on.
You don't mess with hydraulics, man. They, dude, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah, it's pressure. It's not going. The oil, the residual, is not going anywhere. It's just going to have to conform to whatever you put against it. So.
And you know, brass being as malleable as it is, it's going to take the form of whatever's in the chamber, and it did.
What we didn't see any, and this is probably pretty basic stuff, but you know, because you did everything properly, we didn't see any, metal fouling on any of the patches. But if somebody was to look at one of those patches, what would they see if they were seeing that?
If they do see any type of metal, or especially like the first couple shots, you know, if they start seeing that, there's definitely a problem somewhere in the barrel. At that point, you know, it's a real good idea just to stop and take it to someone who has a bore scope. Scope the barrel, see where the problem is, see if it lies in the throat, see if there happens to be an imperfection somewhere mid barrel or whatever it is. See what that is, because more than likely, if it's doing that initially, it's not just going to go away. More than likely, or it's going to have an adverse effect, even if it doesn't do it anymore. So at that point in time, it's probably a good idea just to have it bore scoped and see if a person can pinpoint exactly what it is, you know. And if it is something that truly went away, it doesn't hurt anything. Most people run a bore scope in them for little of nothing. So it doesn't hurt anything to not have the peace of mind, if nothing else, to say, yeah, we looked in it and everything looks good and it shoots great now. So we're in good shape. But
well, this was super cool watching it all happen. Hopefully you guys go in and check out the videos. The one of Isaiah building the rifle will be far cooler than the one of Nick and I building the rifle. But hopefully both are entertaining.
I was gonna say one might be more entertaining than informational.
Yeah,
but you guys did a phenomenal job, though. I mean, that thing,
it worked.
It came together.
it works great. It came together,
and as we expected to. Though when we showed up and we talked to Isaiah about some stuff, we did realize there was a few things we'd have done differently. The go gauge, we would have made it. Tried to make it close much more nicely on that go gauge. I think there was even something else that I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, we did have where we got our all put together, headspaced, and you're like, hey, what's this piece? And I said, that's a recoil lug. And he said, when was that supposed to go on? I said, about 10 minutes ago. I mean, stuff like that. That was obviously like just a real dumb mistake, but it's one of those things where experience goes a long way.
Yeah.
Well,
even learning too about like barrels can have a natural bend to them.
And is that was something actually I was kind of curious if you could add a little bit more to. Is that just the offset of where the bore is in compared to the outside diameter of the?
No, it's actually it runs deeper than that. Some naturally, some are worse than others.
Yeah.
But they can have sort of a let's say a loose string effect.
Okay.
If you had a string hanging across the doorway and it was loose, that's a very exaggerated example.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But the bore can somewhat simulate that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the bore. It's not actually the barrel being like bent. That's just how the bore is.
It's just the bore.
Okay.
So what we try to do when we was indicating in is use an indicating pin at the face of the barrel, and then we use an indicating pin off the face of the barrel, so we can find, if any, where that high and low is.
Yeah.
And then we mark, because we want the bullet to exit
At the high point.
uphill if possible. That's where we want it, within a few degrees of that.
Which is something that me and Jim, the way we did ours, didn't really have a way to do that.
And
We
we
just turned
just
the barrel in
slapped the
until our
barrel in.
headspace, then we tightened down the nut.
At the point that you was there, it would be impossible almost, because you're dealing with the difference between a go and a no-go gauge is probably 6 degrees.
Yeah.
So
That barrel had already been threaded,
Yeah,
so it was going to go into the point it was going to go into.
Yeah.
Regardless.
it's almost unchangeable at that point. You're that has to be done right off the get-go with that barrel blank, like we did. Mark that barrel blank, and then get the action fitted to that. That way we know where it enters, where it exits.
Which is just another example of the meticulous process and how that can pay off. I mean, in our case, if that high point, I think is how you referred to it, of the bore, if that was pointing left, we may have had to use a little bit more windage.
Mm-hmm.
Which we did have to use up a bit of
We did,
more windage,
yep.
I'd say, than Mark did sighting in.
Or if that was pointing down, I mean, we might not have as much elevation adjustment as we would theoretically like for long range shooting.
Go
So
with a 20 MOA
it
base
is
right off the bat.
Exactly. Yeah. Being able to have that little bit of extra touch to make sure that everything lines up the way you want it to in the end was super cool to see you do.
Yeah.
Well, all these super precise things, they add up. They stack, and it's boom, boom,
Tolerance
boom,
stacking.
boom, boom, tolerance stacking. Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's pretty cool to see the final product like what we have here today.
Beautiful rifle.
Once you, the same way we was just talking about shooting, I mean, once you take any variable you can take out of the equation is one that you don't have to worry about. So if there's, does that take a lot of extra time? Not really. If it takes another 15 minutes, so be it. The benefits for it are going to be for 4,000 rounds now of that barrel.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, what takes a little time here can go a long ways in the end, and eliminating that process. Maybe one of these, maybe that particular rifle you wanted to put an optic on that doesn't have a super wide range of windage capability. So then you call and you say, hey, man, I'm almost zeroed, but I lack about 3/10 from being able to get it far enough right or left. Or, or in the case of a long-range shooter, most of us have built-in or have rails that have 20 or 30 MOA in it. Well, if you send the bullet going downwards, you've kind of canceled that back out to where you're almost back at that 0 MOA, or depending on how exaggerated it is. So
Yeah.
And the further out towards the edge you get towards the circle, the less straight up and down you've got before you start hitting the edge.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that we try to account for with some scope designs like a Gen 2 Razor, where it travels, it's actually limited to make sure that you only have that same travel depending on
It's limited in its windage.
Exactly. But if you take an older design optic, that's certainly something that you see more and more, or used to see a lot more. The other thing that's important to note is that the further you get off in optical zero, the less resolution you're going to get.
Yep.
Your optical quality is going to suffer
You're looking
by
at the
taking
very
yourself
edge
further
of
and
the
far
image
off
instead
zero.
of more
Yeah.
at the center of the image.
You really want to try to keep all of them. I mean, as close to center. Bore line, everything always works better on center. So it just one piece that, by all stretch of imagination, the very first 308 that I ever built had absolutely none of that factored into it. I had, at that point in time, I never thought about it. It never got to that point until later in life, when I'm trying to figure out some of the little quirks that you could uncover to help out in the end. And I think pretty much everybody that does a job day in and day out will find better ways, or more efficient ways, or something to refine, a way to refine something, and that's just simply what it is. But it really doesn't take a whole lot of time to do that, to make it all work. So that's why we.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, I can say this: you can't appreciate the good unless you've experienced the bad. And I've shot a handful of crummy rifles over the years, and I can tell you this, Isaiah, I appreciate the heck out of this rifle.
glad to do it for you.
I'm the same way. I'm just happy that I can actually sled. Look, I don't even have the nice one. I have the just shy of super Gucci nice one. And I can at least sled load the dang thing, and I'm happy as can be. I didn't leave today.
It's the little things in life, Jim.
With bloody fingers from having it.
It may not be a Lamborghini, but you got a pretty respectable Camaro there. So,
Oh yeah.
I think you shot about an inch group at 500 yards at the
Yeah,
day.
inch and a half. Yeah.
you can't complain about
That'll
that.
do.
Mark was at an inch at 500. I think I was at an inch and a half. So
Yeah.
I did beat him in the 22 rimfire.
You did.
Shooting contest.
Yeah,
You did.
yeah.
Lest we forget.
But I cleared the long distance little
You did.
diamond plate rack, Jim.
You know what? We'll play this game off air.
Okay. Well, I have to defend myself.
that's right. I don't know why you guys waited to have him shoot against me. Couldn't I shoot up against somebody that was going to drop a shot? You guys throw me down there, and then I can't even win on my own range.
It's brutal, man.
It is
Super fun day, guys.
Yes.
It was. It's been a really good couple days. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us
Yes,
out.
thank you.
Thanks for all your help as well. And hopefully, for those of you who are curious about this and want to learn more, definitely check it out. We have Curtis Custom Weapons, CCW. So, Thank you again.
And if you don't want to figure it out, just send it over here. Easy.
That's right. That's it. That's how it works.
Cool.
All right. So there will probably be more coming from this podventure. Stay tuned. Let us know what you think about custom guns and stuff. So, yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.